You're listening to What It's Like with Luce, a podcast highlighting ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm your host Lucy Norris, and on today's episode, I'm picking the brains of former world champion kickboxer and karate Olympic hopeful. Sport has been heavily featuring in her life since she can remember. Always looking for somewhere to get moving, it was walking inside a gym in her hometown of Sligo that kickstarted everything, quite literally. Taking up kickboxing took her all the way to the top as she established herself as one of the world's best athletes in the sport. Suffering in silence, no one knew her career and her life were about to turn on their heads during a holiday where her family witnessed her pain for the first time that had been there for years. Being diagnosed with Crohn's disease didn't hold her down, however, as she returned to take home the world champion title once again. Switching lanes, the athlete traded in her gloves for a karate belt and with the Olympics in sight set about conquering a new arena. Sharing her journey so far, touching on the dark side of sport and letting me in on the realities of life as an elite athlete, here's what it's like to be Caradh O'Donovan. Welcome, Cara. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. I think the easiest place to start is at the beginning. So if you don't mind chatting a bit to me about what it was like for you growing up. I think you're from Sligo, and how sports fit into that and how you first discovered kickboxing.
Sure, yeah. It was completely accidental that I got involved in kickboxing. I wouldn't have come from a particularly sporty family, like my dad would have been a sports fan, but nobody really played sports. I was the youngest of four, but I can't remember a time where I wasn't obsessed with it. So any sport, and I was insanely competitive as well. So I think sport was just a natural fit to kind of channel that competitiveness, and I guess I was good at it as well. So the plan was that I was going to join a football club, but I feel really old now, but back when I was starting sport in Sligo, there was just no clubs for girls near me anyway, and the only other really option was there was a kickboxing club down the road, and there wasn't many girls there either. But I guess in an individual sport it's a bit easier just to kind of to fit in, because you don't need a team to go to competitions, it's just yourself. So I stumbled on to the kickboxing club and they couldn't get rid of me after that. So yeah.
I suppose as well, what was it like for you being a girl in maybe a traditionally male dominated sport? Did you notice it at all growing up, or was it just normal?
Oh no, I noticed it all the time. It wasn't normal. It was as I got more involved, and as the years went on, a lot more girls joined. But definitely when I started, I think there might have been maybe one or two, and none of the girls lasted. So I'd be friends to join with me, and in the club as well, to try and describe it, it was this really dingy hall underneath the parish church. It was filthy. There was no changing rooms, so everything about it just put girls off. So yeah, I definitely noticed it. It didn't really, well, it probably did bother me, but I love the sport too much, so I just kept stuck at it, and even trying to get competition, that was a challenge, in order to get fights and to get opponents that are kind of your same age and weight. That was always a struggle. So I was always aware of it, and I always got comments from people saying I shouldn't be doing that sport and it's not for girls, and are you not worried about your face getting banged up? And there was always a comment from somebody, I guess. So it didn't offend me particularly, but I definitely noticed it. But I think it's got better now. No, it definitely has got better. So it's great. I go now training, and the club, there's rakes of girls. I do karate now, but it's the same across the sports. It's becoming much more open, I guess, to girls and boys, which is great.
Yeah, it's amazing that you stuck with it even through, teenage years, I suppose, where maybe it would have been a bit harder not to care about those kind of things or those comments. But so when did you decide that this was going to be something that you were going to take really seriously and turn it into your career, as opposed to just having it as a hobby?
I think I was, maybe it was after I'd taken a break. So if I just kind of give you a background, when I was going to college, at that point I'd already represented Ireland. I'd won world championships, and I'd been selected for, I guess, the the highest level world championships that there is, called Waco kickboxing, and I'd got a bronze medal in that in my first year in college. But I still wasn't taking it that seriously. Like, I was still, you know, training just 3 or 4 times a week and not doing any gym work. You know, I never really saw it as something that I had to work that hard at. It was just like I was getting by, I guess, on natural talent at that point. So when I went to college, I couldn't afford to keep training. Like, I had to get a job. There was no such thing as a sports scholarship for my sport, even if you were one of the best in the world. It just didn't, it just wasn't a place for martial arts back then. But so when I came back to the sport after college, the standard had completely ran away. And I remember going to the first World Cup, and I was still just training, I guess, at just an okay level, the same way you know you might if it was as a hobby. And I got absolutely battered, like, I mean, destroyed. So it was a real, like, moment where I had to make a decision, and I did not like the feeling of being, like, not good anymore or getting beaten. So that was the kind of turning point. I just thought, look, if I'm going to do this, like, and especially if I wanted to kind of consistently be winning on the world stage, I'm going to have to like really double up on my efforts. And that's when I started to take this as really seriously. And, you know, I still worked, but I guess everything was molded around trying to compete internationally. So I only worked in order to be able to pay the bills and to be able to go and compete. So yeah, I guess that was when it changed.
Yeah, and so you do have Crohn's disease as well, which must have been a pretty life-altering discovery when you got diagnosed with it, and then obviously had a massive impact on your sport. So can you maybe take me back to that time? I suppose what it was like competing with these symptoms but not knowing what was going on, and then to the day that you did discover something wasn't right in your body.
Yeah, you know, I'm diagnosed with Crohn's about 6, almost 7 years now, but I would say from as long as I can remember, I've had symptoms, and they got progressively worse. Like, I think when I hit my early 20s, I just got sicker and sicker all the time, and I never knew what it was. But when I competed, the symptoms got aggravated, and I now know that stress is like a big trigger for me. And that's just natural, I guess, stress that you want going into competitions to kind of get yourself ready and prepared. That, like, absolutely floored me and made me so ill. And for, like, I even went and did a master's in sports psychology because I was convinced that this was all to do with my mindset, that I couldn't perform on big occasions because I kept getting sick. And, you know, people would say to me, like, you're so hot and cold, you know, you just beat somebody so easily, and then you come to medal fights or you come to another competition and you fight like a beginner. And so that was like the pattern for a few years, and I'd be getting, like, very sick, like, I mean, vomiting, passing out, night sweats, like, just so many symptoms. And yeah, so I never really thought it was physical, which is crazy really when I look back on it. But I think then towards my late 20s, the symptoms just got so bad, and I was just trying to put, like, a plaster over it metaphorically and just try and get on with it. But it wasn't until my family, because I didn't live with my family at that point, but we were away together, and they saw how sick I was. So I ended up then going into hospital, and I was diagnosed, like, pretty quickly at that point, which isn't always the case for some people. But I think I'd had about 10 years of, like, really bad symptoms that I'm kicking myself now that I should have dealt with years ago. But anyway, that was kind of how it all came about.
That must have been really, really tough for you to be competing with those harsh symptoms.
I think looking back now, you know, at the time I didn't realize it, and I used to give myself such a hard time that, you know, that I wasn't winning everything, because I was winning a lot, but, like, it was never good enough for me unless I won absolutely every single competition. And, you know, there was times that I lost, and I used to beat myself up so much about it. But I think now I can put it into context a bit and realize, well, actually I did a lot better than I probably should have done, considering the symptoms. But it is difficult even now, like, and I haven't managed quite well. I know a lot of people think that I probably push myself too hard and to compete with it, but, like, as long as I'm not, like, very ill, I think it's something that I love to do, and I do try and just give myself a bit of a push to do it. But it's not easy, and you are kind of, yeah, I sound like, I'm trying to make excuses, but you kind of are
Oh,
at a
not at all.
disadvantage. Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I love playing sport, and if I'm healthy enough to continue doing it for another while, then I feel very lucky, and I don't put life and death kind of on the results anymore. If I have a bad day, like I just have to deal with it, and so I put it into perspective. But it's not easy, and it's hard to explain what the symptoms are, because you take one look at a person with Crohn's, and 90% of the time they look really healthy and they don't look like there's anything wrong. But if you could see the insides, I guess, of their stomach or their bowels, without getting too graphic, it will be a whole different story. So it's one of those kind of invisible illnesses that you don't always see. But
Yeah.
like I don't like to, I guess, focus on it too much, because I think then you can get pretty down on yourself and feel sorry for yourself. But I just feel like I'm lucky that I still get to compete.
Yeah, of course. And I'd be curious to know what the reaction was from, because at this point, you'd established yourself really well as a top world champion kickboxer. So what was the reaction of your sport? And did you find that there was good support for, as you said, I suppose more of an invisible illness rather than, something that you could look at you and definitely say, okay, you're at a disadvantage because of this, whatever, did you feel like they received it well, or what was the reaction when you went back to them?
I guess, to put it bluntly, there was no support or very little understanding of it. And at the time I was angry. So when I got diagnosed, I had been preparing for a team selection fight. So they used to do like trials for selecting people for the teams for world championships. But they were never really set in stone, and you had to make so many of them in order to qualify. And I was going to miss one of them because I was in hospital. I had got food stuck basically in my stomach, and it took like 5 days of morphine drips to let it pass through. So at that point, I just requested a couple of weeks off, and they never even responded to me. And I went on to Facebook and found out that I'd been basically kicked off the team for that year, and they'd awarded my place on the team to somebody else. Their attitude was very much like, well, if you didn't bother to show up. And I think commitment to training and to the selection criteria is never something anyone could accuse me of not trying to make. I mean, I would say I was probably one of the most committed athletes to the team. So at the time, I was really angry about that and really upset. But I think now I can look at it a bit more, I guess, balanced. And I think a lot of it came down to just, well, one of it was that they weren't particularly very understanding or compassionate people that are in the leadership of the sport. But I think another side of it is they just didn't understand. They didn't grasp how serious the illness is or can be. And so that was actually what prompted me to start talking about it, because when I first got diagnosed, like, I was so embarrassed by this, because it's not a very, I guess, attractive disease. You're talking about sitting on the toilet basically. So it was something that I was very embarrassed about and I wouldn't talk about. But I think when I saw how little people understood it and how it was going to unfairly impact me in a sport, that if I'd had a different illness or disability that was far more visible, I think people would have been more understanding. So that's when I started to talk about it. And I also felt that, like, I was almost 30 or thereabouts, and if I was struggling with the stigma from it, I mean, what would you be like if you were 13 or 14 with this? So I felt like it was important to try and do a bit of awareness around it.
Yeah, and it's incredible what you've done since. I watched your TED talk as well, and it's just really inspiring. I know I don't mean to dwell on that aspect of your career because you've done so many other things, but it's just so inspiring to hear what you've been through to get to where you are today. And so, as you said there, you didn't dwell on it. You moved on, and you didn't let it keep you from doing what you love. So can you talk me through what happened next once, I suppose, all the diagnosis had been done and I guess you were given medication maybe or something to help you live with it?
Yeah, I had been given a few different options I had to manage Crohn's, and one of them was surgery, which I tried my best to rule out straight away, because I knew with a contact sport, if I'd had to have surgery, just the implications of that would have meant straight away that, you know, it wouldn't have been safe for me to compete. So, you know, to have my bowel removed and basically have a bag attached externally. So that was one of the things that I tried my best to rule out. I was willing to try anything else first. And it's not so much that I feel like that would be an awful thing. I mean, in a couple of years' time, I'd be more than happy if I had to have surgery, if it improved or kept the quality of life. So it's never something that I was saying. A lot of people think, well, you don't want surgery because of the look. The aesthetics of it didn't really bother me, but so that they tried me out on different medication, and it took about 6 months for it really to work. So, you know, it's immunosuppressants that I've taken on and off for the past 7 years, 6 years. But they have been life changing for me. They've you know, they've brought back a quality of life that I didn't even know existed. So I had been so sick that it just became normal, and it was only after about 6 months to a year of taking medication that I realized, oh, this is great. Like, this is how healthy people feel all the time. So yeah, so that was good. And then, you know, I was still pretty angry as well that year. So I was so determined to, you know, get back, and I'm kind of, as much as it's probably not the healthiest way, but I just wanted to prove a point that, like, they did select the wrong person for the team, and that I was, you know, going to come back and be one of the best fighters in the world. And that was kind of what drove me to come back to the sport. So yeah, it was like a very slow process, but yeah, I enjoyed it, I guess.
Yeah, and you definitely got there in the end, because in 2015, I believe you won the World Cup. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that year, like, I'd won World Cups before, but I think that one was pretty special because, you know, it's when people write you off and say, like you're done and you used to be good, it's very annoying, because you know yourself deep down that, you know, you still have that ability, and so even though people are constantly saying this to you, and you know deep down you're good enough, you start to even question it yourself. You just think, you know, maybe I'm past it, and is it worth it? So yeah, I came the first World Cup back after being sick, I won. So that one, I guess if I was to pick out all the World Cup wins over the years, that's probably the most special. I still keep that trophy. So
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah, of course. I mean, you pretty much said to everyone that ever doubted you, well, look, I can do it, you know, just as good as I did before. So you shouldn't have doubted me in the first place. So I love that. I think that's a really inspiring story. And then, so why did you swap over to karate?
um, a couple of reasons. I guess the main reason was the Olympics, and, you know, one of the reasons that I guess I stayed in kickboxing for as long as I did was wondering, and it sounds so naive now because I know a lot more about the Olympic movement and how it works and how sports get involved, but over the years I didn't know any of that. So, you know, I believed it when people told me, oh, you know, kickboxing might get into the Olympics, stick around for another few years. And so that was always something, especially when you've gotten most of what you want out of the sport. There's always still, you know, I guess they sell the Olympic dream so well, and, you know, you want that. So that was the main reason. But I think another reason was I was getting more and more frustrated with kickboxing and the system, and it's hard to like, God, this is going to sound really like up myself, but like it's hard to continuously motivate yourself to win the same competition or to medal at the same competition year after year. And like, I have such respect for people that can do it, but I was getting to the point where I just needed a new challenge, and I just thought, well, look, karate's in the Olympics. It's not like totally different, but it is different. So it will be a big challenge and a big goal to set myself. So yeah, I gave it a few weeks before I made, a few months even before I made the big switch over, because, you know, I didn't want to make this big announcement that I'm going over to karate now and then turn out that I'm rubbish or that I don't like it. So yeah, so I did it for a few months and I won the national championships, and then I thought, look, I'll give this a go. It's good fun, and like, I was getting far more enjoyment out of it as well at that point.
And what was it like when you first started? It must have been, maybe daunting's not the right word, but knowing as you said, moving from something that you knew you were good at, you know, you had the physical proof to show that you could win, to something that was a little bit uncharted territory, regardless of the fact that the sports, you know, had similarities. It was still a completely new world for you to break into.
Yeah, it was harder than I thought it was going to be. That's the first lesson I learned. So I mean, typical athlete, you're so overconfident, and you know, you go into a new sport and think you're going to be world champion in a year. It didn't work out exactly like that, but so it was fun. Like, I mean, I did have some success quite early on, so that kind of gives you a boost to move on. But the contact was, you know, the contact rules were much different, and I was constantly in trouble for hitting girls too hard, and then the girls took that quite personal. You know, they thought I was like intentionally trying to hurt them, so that didn't make me fit in very well at the start. You know, there was this God, how do I explain this? Even within the martial arts, I guess, scene across them all, there's a little bit of, and like I've competed in 3 of them, but there's a little bit of snobbery around whose martial arts is the best. So there was definitely a bit of, who does she think she is? You know, coming in here, this kickboxer thinks she's deadly, and you know, she's trying to take our spot in the team. So that was like the hardest part to deal with initially. But like, I wasn't really there for friends. You know, I have my good friends. I keep them well away from sport because it's such a competitive, I guess, industry. So that I just got on with it, and just dealt with those challenges. But I think then on the international scene, it was difficult too, because you're used to going away to these championships, and like, you're one of the best and everybody knows who you are. And when it comes to like 50-50 clashes, you always come out on the right side of those, and that wasn't happening for me in karate at the start. So I was losing fights like on a draw. They, you know, when they had to pick a winner in a really close fight, I wasn't getting those decisions, and I was so used to that being the way for so long. So your ego takes a big dent. But then, like, it's a good challenge. I think it's important to challenge yourself. Otherwise, you just repeat the same life like year after year after year if you're not doing anything new and not throwing yourself in the deep end every so often. Like, I just don't see the point of life if you're not doing that. So that's just my take on it. Everybody's different. So I enjoy just new challenges, and like, I've fallen flat on my face a million times, but I think it's the best way to learn is just to jump straight in the deep end and see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. I can imagine, you know, well, it's like anything. Once you've kind of achieved as much as you can achieve in something and reach the top tier, it's kind of like, okay, well, do I just try and do this over again, or do I try something new? And I'm sure most people would want to go and try something new, which you did. And I mean, I'm not an athlete of any sort, so I'm just speaking from like perception, or what, you know, you would assume looking in. But, you know, the Olympics is a massive thing. I'm sure every athlete would love the chance to compete there. So can you talk me through, I suppose, I know Tokyo 2020 was supposed to be the time, but what's kind of happening now with the whole thing, and how is it being in that mind frame of competing to get the chance to go to the Olympics?
Like, it was difficult in one way, because like, I'm old, like I'm well, old in sports terms. I'm 36 now, so this was probably going to be the last year. And then when they put off the Olympics a year, that's a challenge in itself, to, you know, just to think, can your body actually keep going at this point for another year? But then within this year alone, I was injured quite a lot. So, you know, from that point of view, it didn't, you know, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. But yeah, when they put it off to next year, I mean, there was no choice really. And like, as much as it personally didn't suit me, maybe in every way, to put it off a year, I mean, I was probably one of the first athletes to call for it to be postponed, because back in March, like, we had no idea what this pandemic was going to be like. But as it turned out, there's just no way, like in July or August of this year, they could have had 11,000 athletes plus thousands of volunteers and staff and coaching traveling from every corner of the world with a global pandemic. So it just was never going to happen. But I guess the plan now for next year, it's difficult because some sports are able to keep going, but in combat sports that are indoors, there's very few countries running events. So we've had no competition since February this year, and even training was difficult. Like, you know, the government here didn't necessarily, indoor sports, I guess, were last on their priority list for resumption of training. And but we have been training the last few months. So our qualification event now is not happening until June of next year, which gives us some time, I guess, to prepare. But it's whether we have warm up, I guess, competitions and access to proper training, because right now it's really difficult. Like if they told me the Olympic qualifiers were happening in 2 or 3 weeks, there's just no way I'd be prepared. So it's difficult because we just don't have the necessary stuff, I guess, that you need to be at the highest level in your sport. But at the same time, that might change. You know, there's a vaccine coming, so yeah, fingers crossed. I'm still not giving up anyway. There's still a chance that we'll get there. So yeah, I'm gonna give it my best shot.
Yeah, definitely. And it'd be so cool to see you there. So I have my fingers crossed for you. And do you know what you would do if, you finish sport tomorrow?
Yeah, that's something I've been working on the last year, because yeah, it was last year, 2019, I got a pretty bad, I guess, health scare and injury, and it was only at that point that I realized, like, this is going to end. Like, you're on your way out. There's not, you can't be an athlete forever. And as much as, I don't, like, this isn't necessarily my job. Like, I don't get paid to compete, but at the same time, everything that I've done since I've been 12 years of age has been around competition and being an athlete. So I really struggled with that last year, because I wasn't sure at that point whether I'd get back to some level of fitness and to compete again. So I have signed up to an athlete transition program, which is like a 2-year thing. And so yeah, I have given some thought. I think I'd like to get another few months out of this, or another year. But if it did all end tomorrow, I think I'd be in a position to deal with it. Okay, I'd probably be upset. But yeah, I've looked. I mean, I am starting to work in radio now, and I really enjoy that, because I think live broadcast it's like the same buzz that you get from, like, the adrenaline rush of things having to go right in a specific time frame. So it's kind of similar to that kind of elite competition. And then I'm doing, mentoring work and different bits and pieces like that. So I'd say I'll never do one thing, because I have a tendency to get absolutely, like, narrow focus on one thing only. And I think if that's taken away, then your whole identity suffers. And so yeah, I've thought about it for sure. I'm still not 100% like I guess confident exactly of what I'll do, but I know it'll never be one thing. It'll probably be a mixture of different things, and maybe not always in sport, but yeah, I'll see. And then there's the athlete advocacy and activism and athlete rights work that I've been doing, and I love that. I really do. So that's something that I might put more effort into when I finish.
Yeah, I've always kind of thought it must be quite a hard thing for athletes to transition after their career is finished, because it's such a shame that they kind of always do have to end early in terms of just how your body evolves. But it must be such a weird thing to go from dedicating so much of your life and so much time to one thing to then just suddenly, have to, I don't know, find a new passion.
Yeah, I don't think it's talked about enough, and it's great that that you're asking me this question, and that I'm starting to see more, like, player associations emerge and governing bodies talk about this. But it's something that is it's a struggle, I think, for everyone. I mean, I've known lots of athletes in different sports that have either been professional or more elite, but not necessarily getting well paid for it. And they've all struggled, all of them, with mental health problems, and just trying to cope and adjust to, just not having sport as their main goal anymore. So it's great to see it, I guess, talked about, but it's a huge problem. And I think people don't realize how addictive the highs and lows and the buzz of sport is. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself in this, but I know that for a lot of my sport career, I was far too invested in it. I mean, I didn't have any life outside of it. And, my 20s, I was probably the most boring person you'll ever meet, because, like, I wouldn't do it. Like, I wouldn't do anything. I think I missed my brother's wedding. I mean, all these things, just so I could compete and win, and I was just obsessed with winning the next medal. So that happens a lot of athletes, and then all of a sudden one day it's gone, and you nearly always don't get to go out on your own terms, like it's an injury or it's whatever it might be. And people then do suffer, and they go into other addictive behavior. You know, you see athletes with problems from gambling, alcohol, drug addiction, and it is a problem. And I think it's great to see it now being discussed, and have athletes then spend, you know, a couple of years trying to prepare in advance for retirement. And also, I think if I was to go back at the start, we should be teaching kids the message really a lot of the time in sport is that, you know, this commitment and dedication, and which is really important messages. But I think sometimes them lines get blurred, and we don't teach kids that, you know, you should have a balance in your life. You should be able to go out with your friends or do something else. It shouldn't be your only thing in life, because nothing's permanent and it could be taken away, like, you know, with the click of a button. So yeah, it's definitely been a challenge for me. But I think I'm kind of at the point now where I feel like, you know, if it's over tomorrow, I'll be fine.
It sounds like you have quite a solid few options to go into afterwards, which must be a little bit comforting. But I'd be curious to know if you think it is possible to be the best and to be, you know, a world champion in something without that sense of addiction and obsessiveness with something. Do you think you can be the best without having those tendencies?
That's like the best question ever, and I'm still struggling so much how to answer this, because there's quite a debate about that. My personal feeling is, if I have to answer that now, I'm not so sure you can. And I see so much around, you know, former athletes and athletes talk about this, that, you know, you don't have to be that, you know, obsessive, addicted, and have like a really toxic, I guess, energy or culture around the sport in order to win medals. I've never seen evidence that would say that's true. I mean, everything I've experienced has been, you know, the more obsessed, addictive, toxic the sports culture got, the more we won. And I've seen that replicated, and I've heard athletes tell me that from every sport across the Olympic movement anyway. I'm maybe not so sure about professional sports. I don't know many like football or rugby players, but in general. So I'd love to be wrong in that. I'd love to think that, you know, I certainly think you can win a medal here and there. Can you win them consistently and be the best year after year? I don't think so. And I wish I had learned that a long time ago, that it's actually not even that important. Like, you know, as a culture, we're obsessed with winners, and we're obsessed with like being the best and, you know, success. And like, it is important, you know, it's important in some ways, but it's like, there's more important things to life. And it's taken me, you know, 36 years or a little bit less to learn that lesson. I just don't think you should have to over sacrifice anything. I mean, you do. I think sacrifice is part of achievement in anything, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I think when you're constantly, you know, sacrificing everything your entire life, and what's important to you in order to win something, I think you need to question that. And yes, I'm rambling here, but I'm still not sure.
No, it's so interesting though.
Yeah, I mean,
it's so interesting.
I'd love to be wrong. I'd love somebody to say, I know this person or this team here, and they have won everything, and they've just been the happiest, most balanced, no issues, no struggles. Everything has just been, you know, living in the clouds, happy days. But I just don't believe it, and but I'm very open to having that change. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, and having been, I suppose, on the side of that traditional success that you were talking about there, you know, being champion of the world and all this kind of stuff that people just associate with the ultimate or the epitome of success. What is your personal definition of success, and what does that word mean to you as an individual?
Well, it's completely changed, first of all, since, you know, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have said, like, winning, that's the only thing that counts as success. I'm laughing just thinking back. Like, I was Oh God, what a dose! Like really, when I think about it, I was. But now it's different. Now I success to me, part of it is that like achievement is definitely a part of it, because I'm like everything I've been since I can remember is competitive. I've been trying to work on not making that like really difficult, so that I can at least play a game of cards or Monopoly with my family at Christmas and not fall out. So yeah, so I think like achievement's part of it, but I think having a balance, and like my health has been the one thing that's taken a big hit from sport, and not, I guess, pushing myself past the limit. So I think, minding your health, having relationships and having people that, that support you, and, having a balance, I guess, and just living in the moment. Those are success for me. And every day it's like it's a constant reminder that I don't get carried away and get back into old patterns. So that could change again. Ask me that in 5 years and I'll probably have a whole different definition.
Yeah, well, I suppose they do say what success isn't a destination, it's the journey, or so. I'm probably getting that wrong, but like that I feel
Yeah.
like it makes sense. And then I just have one more question for you, and I'm gonna let you get on with your day. If I put your 10-year-old self in front of you today, having been through the monumentous amount of things you've been through already in your life, what's the biggest piece of advice you'd give that 10-year-old self moving forward?
Oh wow. um God, there's so much I'd say. I definitely, say like stop caring so much what other people think. Like it's taken me a long time, and even now like I still struggle with it, but I think it's more liberating when you just are comfortable in your own skin. So I would say that, don't care so much what other people think. Enjoy your sport more, and not worry. Like, I never really enjoyed the moments of success, I guess, as I determined it at the time. Once I won one thing, I was straight away focused on the next thing. So I'd say enjoy it. But then I guess the other thing, and I guess I've debated this over and over in my mind, would I have ever represented my country if I knew how difficult the challenges were going to be? I'm not so sure. I probably would have just played sport at grassroots level, enjoyed it, and done other things with my life. But so I'd probably say that, maybe not just be so competitive, and just maybe enjoy the sport, enjoy the social part of it, and the actual sport itself, and don't turn it into something that has to be, constantly winning all the time. Yeah, those are probably the things I'd say.
That's so interesting. Sorry, now I have another question just off of that. Just quickly, because I know I'm taking up your time, but do you think that going as like professional isn't the right word? I don't what like going more elite with a sport ruins a sport for you?
Yeah, it's obviously different for everyone else, and it's not for me. Like I'd never be saying, I'm not unpatriotic or anything like that. Some people might hear me say that I'd never, want to go to World and European Championships. It's because of that. But yeah, I think my personal experience throughout the years, like I remember more the bad than the good. And yeah, so for me personally, it has done that. It has taken a sport that I adored and turned it into something. Now, if I think even particularly with kickboxing, it's turned it into something that I don't always have the nicest memories of. But if I think back to the actual part of the sport I enjoy, it's when I go into the gym and I just, there's good people around me and it's fun and I'm training. Like those are the standout moments that have been the most fun. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's like it's different for everybody else. Some people will have had a brilliant experience competing at the highest level and being an elite athlete. For me, there has been good. I mean, I'm not saying there hasn't. There's been
Yeah.
a lot of good, but there's been a lot of bad too. And I think the part that I loved, and sometimes you forget about that when you're just competing all the time and you have to win and you feel pressure. The part that's the most fun is the actual activity and just getting lost in it. And I think that's the bit I'd focus on if I was to do it again. And if that brought about winning and that brought about sports, like world championships, well, great, but I wouldn't have had that as the main focus.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear about, because I suppose it's almost like the dark side of sport that no one talks about because everyone's just focused on the glory side of it the whole time. But it's really interesting to hear you speak on that.
Yeah, and you know, the thing about this is it's very hard to even recognize, like as you said, that dark side of sport when you're in it, because it's so normal. And a lot of the time it's when people are like 5 or 10 years out of the sport that they look back and they think, oh my god, like that was just a bizarre time, or else they never want to look back. So they're like, I'm not trying to like ruin sport for everyone, but that
No,
side
but
it does exist, and I think it isn't talked about. And I think one of the major reasons it's not talked about is the culture is like, you know, you don't really talk about weaknesses in sport and you just get on with things, but also you don't even recognize sometimes when you're in the middle of it, this isn't probably healthy, or this isn't like a good thing to be doing for your own health, physical or mental health. And it's only when you're kind of out of it. So like I'm on the wind down from sport, and I can kind of see things, I guess, looking back, like I can see some of the madness of even just the weight cuts or different bits and pieces that I put myself through that you know, no rational person would do it, let's just say.
yeah.
And like, so it does exist. And you know, I think sometimes that we don't I don't want to criticize media in any way, but sometimes I wish we got a balanced view of it, because there'll be some 5-year-old kid turning on the TV watching about the Olympics and watching this whole, like, you know, inspirational story, which is there, like it's definitely part of sport, but when you only see that on your TV and on social media, you're kind of, I guess you're tricked into this whole sports movement. And I just think if we, you know, what's the harm in giving a balanced, I guess, story, because you know that's the reality of it. It's not all good, but it's not all bad either. Like it's somewhere in between. It's probably more good in general than bad, but I think we need to start talking about that side of it too.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely that almost like superhuman personification of athletes that the media love. And working in the media, like I fully know that the media has a lot to answer for one-sided stories. So don't worry about criticizing. So yeah, but anyway, I could talk to you all day about this kind of stuff, but I'm not going to keep you. So thank you so much for coming on and joining me today. It's been so interesting to pick your brain. I really appreciate it.
Oh no, thanks a million, Lucy, for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening, and as always, please rate, share and leave a comment if you like what you hear. And don't forget to follow @whatitslike_pod on Instagram and Facebook. To find out more about Cara and her career thus far, visit the links provided in the show notes. I'll be back on Thursday with more inspiring stories, but for now this has been What It's Like with Luce.